Hello guys and welcome to my new video, and today's a big one. We're going to be talking about an aspect of Mythic Plus, an aspect of 9.1 that I feel could have a lot of implications, whether it's going to be fun or it's going to be pretty bad, and that is Mythic Plus Affix, or Seasonal Affix to be more precise. In terms of Seasonal Affixes of Shadowlands, we had Prideful. In terms of Seasonal Affixes in BFA, we had a bunch of Seasonal Affixes, including Reaping, Awakening, Infested, Beguiling. Oh, Infested. But either way, this video, we're looking at a big data mine changes, or basically Seasonal Affixes to some extent has been revealed, or at least there has been some data mine text. Big disclaimer before I'm going to do any type of videos like this, there has been a lot of speculations about whether this is going to be the Mythic Plus Affix, because Blizzard, or Ian Hazzikostas personally himself, said that the team tests multiple different affixes and then they kind of decide which one is the most fun and then they go for it. So maybe this is just one of the tested affixes and it might not be the one that they go with, but we have to talk about it. I want to rank my favorite seasonal affixes from BFA, from Shadowlands, and basically compare, or basically to see how they compare to each other going from one expansion to another. There's not going to be a whole lot of dungeons being added. Okay, there's going to be a mega dungeon added, but in terms of affixes, they don't really play around with it outside of the seasonal affix. So it's very important for the seasonal affix to be quite fun. So this is something that has been data mined, and take this with a bit of pinch of salt, but defeat the jailer's forces to gain cool powers. Surprise, surprise, Torghast has integrated into the mainstream Mythic Plus and raiding. Now, if you watch some of my videos in terms of raiding, you know that Terrorglue, the first boss of Sanctum of Domination, has the exact same mechanic. You kill mobs, those mobs drop anima powers, and they're going to be random, and you can pick whichever you want. And they're going to be, like, for example, there's going to be, these are some of the powers that have been data mined. Feel free to read them and check them out. Some of them are way better than others, and I'm going to highlight some of them. But generally speaking, some of them are going to be like, oh hey, you're immune to fear, and they're going to be applicable to bosses like Terrorglue, who has a fear effect. And this seems to be coming into Mythic Plus. Now, there is a lot of outrage, and guys, leave your comments below the initial response. What is your initial response? My initial response was, this could be really fun. This could actually be really fun, but my second response to this was, how random is this going to be? Because, for example, if you're doing a plus 15 key and all of a sudden you get something along the lines of, again, I have highlighted, Huddle Carvings, your damage and healing done is increased by 30% while within 5 yards of at least 2 other players. You get this, and other people don't? This seems like an unfair advantage, or all of a sudden, you know, it's pretty big. Or you get Twisted, whatever this is, while in combat, the 3 nearest enemies or 3 other players to you within 5 yards gain 15 increased damage and healing. So there's definitely certain powers that seem to be a lot better than others. Keep in mind, these are not class specific. So at the moment, these are all generic. They're applicable to everybody or any spec at this given point. They're not like healing rain trait for a shaman. So at the moment, they're generic. They're not class specific. We don't know how we're going to acquire them. The only thing we know is that defeating jailer forces give you these powers. Now, what happens? So my assumption is that it's going to be very similar to Infested or Beguiling. You're gonna have, like, for example, let's look at Hall's Atonement. I'm assuming that, let's say, for example, in the first Trashback pool, one of these is going to be Jailer's Forces, and they're going to drop a cool power or something. Now, it might be something like Beguiling or Infested, where the position might swap every single week based on affixes, which kind of gave you, you know, fresh, new, cool ideas or approaches to the dungeons. That's very possible. So maybe one week they're going to be here, the other week they're gonna be here instead. But what happens after you kill it? You get an orb. Does that orb give you a random power to you or to everyone in the party? We don't know that. The fact, I think the worst case scenario, in my opinion, would be that if you kill this mob and it gives you a completely random power and it only gives it to one person in the party. That would be the absolute worst way to approach it, because honestly, that would be so RNG and people would hate it. A lot of people have talked about how to reduce the RNG to oranges for it. So, should everyone get a power? Maybe certain powers should be limited. For example, there was a really cool suggestion that a person made. At the start of a dungeon, you might have this like talent sheet where you gotta have a list of, hey, there's going to be 4 these jailer mobs. And if you kill the first mob, you can input the power that you want for it to drop. So you get a list of powers that you can actually pick from. And maybe the more powerful powers are only going to be available for mobs at the end of the dungeon, so you don't become overpowered or something along those lines. So controlled oranges type of deal. So I thought that was a pretty cool concept, where you can control the powers you're gonna get, the group chooses which powers to get, or the person chooses which powers to get, and you only get a list of it. It's all gonna depend on how Blizzard is going to implement this. Like I mentioned at the start of the video, the fact that we don't know how random this is going to be a big deal breaker for a lot of people. I do have to mention that there is a small part of me that says, screw it all, man. Just give the most random powers to everybody and see how it goes. Screw these, like, you know, generic powers. Give all of the powers from Torghast, like, you know, the Mistweaver, Corrosive Dosage, like the Resto Shaman healing range traits, and just go for it all and see what happens. But I know that's not gonna happen. I know there's a lot of fun elements to it. Like, I would like to see some class-specific traits being added, but how do you balance that? Like I talked about the Resto Shaman healing range one, or Mistweaver Corrosive Dosage. Those are extremely fun and they do tons of damage, but how would you balance that? How would the randomness affect it? And honestly, I think there's a huge potential for this, and my initial response that this could be really fun. But at the same time, I'm also extremely scared. Let me know how you feel about this, how it could be fixed. Do you want to have class-specific traits? Do you think that's gonna like make balancing impossible? How do you feel about some of the traits available here? Some of them are really boring, like versatility increases and things like that. Some of them are a little bit more fun. Some of them are completely useless to some extent. And while we're talking about the new affix for Season 2 in Shadowlands for 9.1, let's talk about the previous or Prideful. How do you feel about Prideful? Did you enjoy it? Did you like it? What was the whole idea or your feeling towards this affix, this Kiss Curse affix? Because this is the first time Blizzard has introduced an affix that actually gives you beneficial effects when you defeat it, historically speaking. And here is the list of rankings, or my tier list of affixes from BFA and Shadowlands. And Prideful is the only one that actually gives you something. Blizzard has talked about Kiss Curse affixes for a long time, so it makes sense that the new Season 2 affix is also Kiss Curse. So by curse, you have to defeat a jailer's forces, which could be annoying. It might not give you, you know, it might not give you percentages towards it. We don't know yet. But the kiss effect of this is gonna be cool powers. So you get something cool for doing something crappy. This is a new concept. It was not there in BFA. But these are the affixes that I want to talk about and what I rank. So this is my little S tier, A, B, C, D type of deal. And this is for the people who are not really completely familiar. This is Beguiling. This is Infested, this is Prideful, this is Reaping, and this is Awakened. So, I think the worst affix out of any of the affixes that I played in World of Warcraft ever since it was introduced, it'll have to be Infested. This, in my opinion, was just so annoying. It was a complete chore, and it made me not want to do Mythic Plus. For the people who don't remember exactly what it did, is basically you had this mob, very similar to what the Jailer Force is probably going to be like. There's going to be a special mob in a pack that needs to be killed. Once it's killed, it spawns 2 these Gahoon spawns that go to the nearest mobs, and they try to leech onto the nearest mobs, and that if they successfully do that, you get this, like, you cannot kill them because they regen HP. And all of a sudden, in disorganized groups, if you kill a Beguiling mob, you don't kill the 2 leeches type of deal. It just becomes a domino effect that you consistently start getting these mobs that just cannot be killed. And you have to use CC, you have to use, like, you had to have a lot of organization, and it just wasn't fun because you get nothing out of it. It was really not fun. It was by far the worst affix I've ever had to deal with, and honestly, it was their first attempt at this. They got a lot better, or at least in my opinion, Blizzard got a lot better. The second affix I'm going to talk about, and this is something that came about a little later, and that's going to be Beguiling. Beguiling is basically, in my opinion, an alteration of Gahoonies, or alteration of Infested. Beguiling had these 3 mobs, one mob that kind of reflected damage, you needed to push it back, another mob that had to be CC'd, another mob that kind of spewed out AoE damage. And it was basically 3 different versions of Gahoonies. I didn't feel it was as bad as Infested, but it did have an unfair advantages to certain abilities like Ring of Peace, where you could kind of like chain them away because they weren't properly chained. And honestly, it was another of those things where, like, okay, I have to do this. Like, as a druid, you're gonna use Moonfire to push a mob away, and you do that all the time, and everyone else kills the mobs. And honestly, it wasn't super fun. It was more like, I gotta do this in order to do this game. And I don't think a seasonal affix should be like that. So Beguiling definitely wasn't interesting. After that, I'm gonna go with the new Shadowlands affix, and that is Prideful in the B tier. Now, I think Prideful is actually relatively fun, and I think there's a lot of nice aspects to Prideful. I think the main concept of it being a healer affix and also a DPS affix, and when Prideful spawns, you need to, you know, assign DPS cooldowns, you need to assign DPS or healer cooldowns. I thought it was interesting. I thought it was kind of fun. And, you know, you get these arrows shoot out of you. And I don't think it was overly difficult, but I think the biggest problem with Prideful was how unforgiving it was with the count. So if you messed up, let's say, for example, a tank had a bad route, or maybe a tank had a perfectly good route, but someone ninja pulled the trash bag, and all of a sudden, you're like, well, the Prideful is going to spawn at the wrong location. We're not going to get Prideful before the boss. Then the Prideful after that is going to spawn after the boss. And all of a sudden, the whole run can be jeopardized by a single ninja pull because of how important it is to get those 20%, 40%, 60%. And, you know, it became really, really daunting for pugs and really daunting for tanks. Tanks were blamed for this quite a lot. Even like, oh, tank didn't have a good route, they didn't have a Prideful spawn before the boss, what are you doing, you're so bad. Like, it was just so bad on tanks' mental health, and honestly, there was a fear of tanking at this point. There's not many tanks because of things like that. So, I do feel Prideful was a relative success for a Kiss Curse affix. I think Prideful had, you know, after you kill Prideful, you get this damage boost, this mana. It felt good. It felt good to killing it, and then you combine that damage boost with your cooldowns or with like hero, and you're pumping, dude. The damage you can do is insane. But if things go wrong, it became really, really, really bad, and especially for poke situations. So that's why I'm placing it on the B tier. Now after that, I'm gonna go put Reaping in A tier. And people are gonna be like, Reaping A tier, what are you doing? Reaping was the best thing ever. I was doing so much damage. For the people who don't remember Reaping, 20%, it would spawn a bunch of mobs, come back and like, basically AoE Fiesta. And this was like, the reason I'm putting it in A tier, I almost kind of wanted to put it a little lower, is because it was extremely fun for AoE classes. AoE classes like Unholy DKs would absolutely love this because you would do so much damage, you would live for this. But classes who didn't have AoE damage, like Balanced Druids or Starfall wasn't doing anything in BFA, would like, okay, I guess I'll just do nothing then. And a lot of people were, how do I say it, fooled by how good it was because they were playing an AoE class. For AoE classes, this probably be S tier quite easily. For classes that were not great at AoE, this might feel a little bit less good because all of a sudden you would look terrible in DPS meters, and a lot of people really care about DPS meters. So all of a sudden you're like, okay, I'm playing this class, I'm single target, and my DPS is like 10% lower than the next person. But hey. The reason we succeeded was because I had this single target and we killed the bosses quicker, but no one's gonna care because everyone's gonna look at that Reaping damage. So that's why I'm not placing Reaping in S tier. I think it was great if you're AoE, I think it was terrible if you're single target or you felt really bad. So that's why, but at the end of the day, if you're AoE, oh my god, how fun was this? How fun was this to nuke it down? And honestly, I think it was great. And the best affix in my opinion is going to be Awakened, and I've talked about this for a really long time. I've talked about this before on the stream. Design-wise, is by far the best affix there is, honestly. It made dungeons that were previously, oh hey, you always go on the right side in a Tal Dazar. You always do it. Or you always go on this part. It changed that up because all of a sudden you had these pillars. You had this obelisk. You pick an obelisk and then all of a sudden you had like, your route is opening up. You can skip multiple mobs if you want to. You can skip obelisks sometimes and fight the bosses that were beside obelisks at the end boss. It created new routes for dungeons that were extremely stale because it was the end of BFA. It made old dungeons feel new with a single affix. And I think that was pretty hard to achieve. So guys, I don't want to talk too much about this. I don't want to go on, but this is my general ranking of affixes from BFA, from Shadowlands. Again, it depends if you played the game for a long time in order to know some of these. I am pretty excited about the new affix. I think this Kiss Curse approach to affixes is really interesting, and I think it feels a lot better. There's nothing worse than having an affix like Gahunis or Infested where you really try to kill the mobs and you get nothing in return, and it feels like a chore that you get nothing for. So the approach of Kiss Curse affixes feels a lot better in my opinion. I think Blizzard is gonna nail this.